Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 probably contained the most lore we've had in a single chapter yet. While quite a lot of it was pretty straightforward, we actually got quite a lot of confirmations for our theories this time. There is still plenty of hidden lore under the surface if you go digging for it. Yep, pun intended. So here are 10 things you might have missed in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. Spoilers, obviously. Number 1. Huggy foreshadowing. Chapter 4 ended with a big surprise reveal. Huggy returns! Now you know, I've gotten quite a lot wrong with my theories over the years, but it's nice that one of my oldest theories was proven right. I said all the way back in Chapter 1 that if you don't see a body, assume they are alive, and Chapter 2 gave us huge hints that Huggy would return, showing his blood and fur on a wall in this area. But if you pay attention throughout Chapter 4, there were a bunch of hints that he was going to come back. Right before you head down the slide and have your last scene with Poppy, we find yet another Huggy cutout. This was the same one we saw in Chapter 3, and even back then I said that this was a hint that Huggy would return. But look at just how cheekily placed this one was, just moments before the big reveal. But that wasn't the only hint. Inside Safe Haven, tucked away on one of the walls, we can see someone played Hangman. The word they chose was 5 letters, ended with Y, and wasn't Mommy. This also mirrors one of the early puzzles in the game that utilized Hangman as its clue. Someone drew Huggy there too. This drawing was also seen in Chapter 3, and some people thought that this was a hint that Huggy was indeed dead. But now we know that this was obviously a reference to Huggy's fall and eventual return. Right at the beginning of the game, we see a bunch of large Huggy and Kissy arms lifting up inside the toy graveyard. Something I said in my playthrough felt like a hint. Even the doughy VHS tape right at the start of the chapter referenced Huggy in the letter sent to Jack. But we also got a huge hint towards damaged Huggy in this chapter as well. This is something we've been theorizing for a long time. Since Huggy fell such a long way, I made the suggestion that he would come back in a damaged and more aggressive state, something that we did indeed see in his reveal. But during a puzzle in the secondary labs, we saw a smaller Huggy that had lost their hand, which now seems like a massive hint to damaged Huggy, who himself has lost part of his arm from the fall. That in itself is a cheeky little reference and mirror to Kissy Missy. Huggy lost part of his left arm trying to kill us, while Kissy lost her right arm trying to save us. That was also foreshadowed in Chapter 2, with Kissy's arm being all floppy. It's all coming together now. These two really are a pair. But speaking of Kissy Missy and pairs, brings me very nicely onto my next point. Number 2. Riley's Hidden Tragedy. This chapter contains a ton of lore, characters, reveals, and backstory, which for me is fantastic since it's nice to finally have some confirmations. But in typical Poppy Playtime fashion, this chapter also introduces a bunch of new mysteries. One such mystery is that of Riley, a brand new character to the series with a tragic twist. Riley's notes are some of the very first we can find in the game, and if you find them all and piece them together, it gives us a fresh insight into the mind of one of the living experiments. Riley became an orphan due to a fire and was accepted into Playtime Co.'s orphanage program, the Playcare. However, since many of the other orphans had come here at an earlier age, Riley fell out of place. Many of these orphans had no idea what it was like to grow up with parents, and Playtime Co. was all they knew. Which kind of feeds into the dark themes of this series. Riley missed her parents so much that she even grappled with the idea of being adopted. This led to her feeling isolated within Playtime Co., something her counselor suggested she write down in her diary. Now in one of the later diary entries we see that Riley was chosen. This is a direct reference to Chapter 3 and the tape where we heard Dr. White choose Sam in a similar way.
This week, Dr. White here has selected our very own Samuel Lee.
We know that this means chosen for experimentation, chosen to be transferred into a toy body, but the orphans were kept in the dark about this fact. Riley herself didn't know what she was being chosen for. But what makes this even worse is that many of these experiments weren't successful. This is something I theorized about earlier since the experiment numbers are in their thousands, but we only see a handful of them roaming around the upper levels of the factory. A big theme of this chapter is how Harley Sawyer and the scientists weren't perfect at the transfer process. Many experiments failed in some way. Yarnaby lost many higher cognitive functions. The orientation notebook told us of a Bobby Bear Hug that tried to speak but couldn't, and we see that both Huggy and Kissy can't speak either. The prison was designed to hold all of these failed experiments, and we learn later that the secondary lab was designed to try and salvage something from those failures. So not only were these children being experimented on against their consent, but they also often ended up being killed anyway. Very grim stuff. But I think all of this gives us a huge clue about Riley, and there is one detail about her that I think you probably missed. We eventually find the remains of Riley in one of these cells. She talked about waking up during the hour of joy, but not wanting to take part in it. Trying to help someone in the future, she took the key to the train and locked herself in a cell, presumably to starve to death. Now we find what remains of Riley holding onto the key. It looks like it might have been in her stomach, which means either she swallowed it to stop anyone else from finding it, or, more disturbingly, she swallowed it out of desperate hunger after possibly turning rabid. But taking a closer look at her corpse reveals even more clues. Her skull is enlarged and it definitely looks like it was crafted, but her fur looks almost identical to Kissy Missy. Now we know that this isn't Kissy since Kissy is still alive, well barely, but I do think that this is significant. Later on we find a report that talks about Kissy and her nervous tendencies. It talks about her rubbing the fur on her arm when nervous, something we saw her do in chapter 3, but also something we saw a girl do in this photo. That was also one of my theories, that this girl became Kissy, now pretty much confirmed to be true. But take a look at her experiment number. She is 1172, confirmed by the fact that she was transported to Storage B, the room we know Kissy was held in. We know that Huggy was 1170, meaning that there was a mystery experiment between the two of them, 1171. It makes logical sense that they would try to create a Kissy after a Huggy, so who is that missing experiment? Well, I'm pretty convinced that 1171 is Riley. She is the failed version of Kissy Missy, and that's why she was confined down to the prison. Playtime Co. failed with Riley but tried again and managed to succeed on their second attempt. Riley even talks about not being able to separate her fingers, which could be a hint towards the hands we see Huggy and Kissy both have. Since this chapter taught us exactly what happened to failed experiments, it seems likely that Riley's fate was sealed either way. This failed Kissy was held in prison, awaiting the day the secondary lab came to salvage her. That was, of course, until the hour of joy. Number 3. Lemon. Now this is only a small little Easter egg, but it continues a long-running theme and something that I have made a theory about in the past. Every single chapter of Poppy Playtime has had at least one reference to a lemon. Chapter 1's lemon was added in a later patch, but it can be found on the catwalks below after you drop Huggy. Data miners actually found that this one had recorded voice lines, and a death screen was added in the Spanish localization for the game that referenced it too. Now I actually made a whole theory that the lemon could be a reference to Portal 2 and or Bioshock, games that have had huge influences on Poppy Playtime, something that this chapter only reinforces. Chapter 4 continues this tradition by adding in at least 2 more lemons. One can be found drawn on the wall in Safe Haven, but one can be found in the prison area near the start of the game. After you pull off these boards, you can find the lemon over on the right hand side. Thank you to via_xx in my comments for letting me know about this one. This lemon has voice lines for when you pick it up or drop it, a cute little detail. But slightly less cute if you hold it while under the effects of the red smoke, its mouth starts to move. Also, while editing this video, I realized that it also reacts to things. I think this is a fun little Easter egg, or Easter lemon, for us to find, but the jury is still out on whether the lemon is a silly joke, a reference, or both. I think both. Number 4. The Secret Voices. During Chapter 4, we once again have to contend with the red smoke. We learn in Chapter 3 that this smoke puts people to sleep. Playtime Co. used it on the orphans to stop them from bothering the staff during the night, and now it seems like they used it as a safety measure against the toys as well. But in some individuals, it has adverse effects, such as hallucinations. This is something we experienced in Chapter 3, and most of our hallucinations pointed towards a guilt that we felt about our role in Playtime Co. That guilt led me to theorizing that we were involved in the experiments, and the fact that we had memories of the playcare just supported that. Now, while we don't have a full-blown hallucination sequence in Chapter 4, we do have some parts where we are once again exposed to the red smoke. During the first time, if you listen closely, you can hear some voices that give us huge clues about our character and their role within Playtime Co. Once we start to hallucinate, you can faintly hear what sounds like a conversation. The person says, "I've had it with this place, I'm out of here, I'm not afraid of you anymore." Now, since we are hallucinating this, it must come from our memory just like in Chapter 3. This makes total sense as to why we weren't present during the Hour of Joy. But going even further, you can hear a strange sound in the background, which almost sounds like nature. This is the exact sound that we hear when we finally make it to the lab's entrance at the end of the chapter. This sound is likely played alongside the flowers to make the labs feel a bit more welcoming to the staff, a way for them to subtly forget that they are so far deep underground, a bit like the fake sky ceilings Playtime Co used. But the fact that we remember this sound means we absolutely have been to the primary labs before, and that means that we must have been one of the key science staff involved in the experiments. Now, who we are exactly is still a mystery, but I will delve into that a bit more in a future theory. Number 5. The red tape. Now, usually I don't add the tapes into these lists since it's assumed that you will find all of the tapes in your playthroughs, but Chapter 4 contains one tape that I bet the majority of players will miss, and this one just so happens to contain the biggest confirmation of the chapter. The red tape can be found during the chase sequence with Monster Doughy. Now, not only is it pretty likely that you won't spot it during the fast pace of the chase, but even if you do spot it, you only have a few seconds to grab it before rocks fall down and block it off. Once found, this tape can be played in the red TV after you kill Doughy. She talks about knowing that the Hour of Joy was going to happen and her role in it, but the huge reveal is what Poppy says after. She talks about missing her dad and that things were better when he ran the company. This massively implies that Poppy is indeed the daughter of Elliot Ludwig, a theory that's been going around the community for a long time now, and one that I was almost hoping wasn't true. I had an alternative theory that Poppy was Stella, which now seems much less likely. I mean, there is still a slim chance that there is room for a twist reveal. Perhaps this Poppy isn't the original one, but it looks most likely that this Poppy is indeed the original experiment and Elliot created her. But now it's interesting to see that Poppy has been around for all this time, especially since we see that many of these toys are going rabid. Perhaps that's what's happening to Poppy, and maybe that's why her eyes are slowly becoming more bloodshot. But this also makes the relationship between the prototype and Poppy even more intriguing. But once again, I'll get to that in a future theory. Since we are at the halfway point in the video, it's time for the bonus round. When Doughy throws this lever and Dog Day at you, the plush lands in the same pose as Peter from Family Guy. The sign on the warden's office has the Latin phrase Ludera Tempus, which translates to time to play. You can turn the notes around in-game and some of them have hidden text on the back. This locker contains 2 pictures of someone's cats, probably belonging to the devs. Mommy hides in this locker, hiding from her own broken cutout. We can find 3 small boxies stacked together in safe haven, possibly a hint that we will indeed see Boxy in a future chapter. This poster for Varg Haug, not sure if I said that right, which translates to Wolf Hill, was also referenced in Chapter 3, possibly a reference to Wolf Hill in China, a site of significance to Buddhism, which has strong themes of reincarnation. Or it could possibly be a reference to Wolf Hill children's books. These moths are probably a reference to Amber, one of the artists for the game and a lover of bugs. Shout out to them, I personally loved their art. Once you come back through this area towards the end of the game, you can see something has broken the electrical puzzle you completed earlier and knocked poor Barry over. Not only is this a hint that 1006 has been here, but it also shows just how powerful he really is. Number 6. The Doctor's Secret Room. Now this room has a ton of lore in it, but just like the red tape, I bet a lot of people will miss this one. To get in Sawyer's secret room, you have to pick up a keycard being guarded by 2 of the Sentinels before leaving this area. Once you have it, it allows access into a room with a note, a VHS tape, and a radio. Each one gives us a greater insight into the relationship between the Doctor and the prototype. The note was one of those found in the ARG, and it details Harley's expulsion from the Young Geniuses program by Elliot Ludwig. Elliot removed him since yes, he was a genius, but he lacked humility, something that deeply concerned Elliot. This is only reinforced in the radio that tells us the Doctor was willing to sacrifice thousands of children for his own research. It also shows us that he really doesn't care for any of them. He sees them as nothing more than fodder for science, exactly what Elliot was afraid of. The VHS tape gives us a conversation between the prototype and the now robotic form of Sawyer. This is very different to their conversation we heard in Chapter 3. Back then, it seems like Sawyer was torturing the prototype to get information out of him. But now the two are talking more like colleagues, Colleagues that absolutely distrust and dislike each other, sure. But the most interesting part of this conversation is the secret that they are both trying to uncover. It's made clear that the prototype is trying to achieve a breakthrough in science, something that both he and Sawyer struggled with even when Playtime Co. was fully operational. I think this secret is the same one that the scientist referred to in Chapter 1, where he said,
"I'm not worried about myself. One breakthrough and I'll be back."
I think the breakthrough is the prototype trying to bring someone back from the dead. Either that or the reversal of the transfer process that turns humans into dolls. Either one would be a huge twist in the story if the prototype managed to figure it out, but it also makes the current story even more disturbing. The prototype has indeed been carrying on with his experiments all these years later, just using the toys as his test subjects. And let's not forget, he's got all of those orphans in stasis. This now probably explains why he recovered all those dead toys. He was either taking them for parts, or he was taking them to try and bring them back. But this gets even more mysterious when you consider my next point. Number 7. Captain AJ. Near the beginning of the game, we see a bunch of dead staff, mostly guards. Now up until this point, we've only ever seen one human corpse in the entire series, aside from in the VHS tapes of course. We have only seen one skeleton on Catnap's shrine in Chapter 3. Before that, all we saw were toy bodies. This now makes sense as we learned from Poppy that all the staff were dragged below into the prison areas during the Hour of Joy. Now one of our theories was confirmed correct. Some of the staff were kept alive to be eaten later. They were kept in the same cells that used to house the experiments. But at one part we get to see a bunch of dead security staff that look like they tried to hold a desperate last stand against the toys. But if you look more closely, you can see that they all have name badges. Now I don't know if these names are developers or some of a reference, or even just made up, but one of these names in particular might be a huge clue to the series. The unfortunate guard who was holding the keycard that we needed was named Captain AJ. Now what makes this very mysterious is that Captain AJ is a character in a story that closely mirrors the story of the Warden in Chapter 4. We learn from the tape in the Warden's office that the Doctor offered him a choice: give him the Omni Hand and Sawyer would use it to open and close certain doors, clearing a path to the exit for the Warden. This explains how Sawyer got his hands, arms? On the Omni Hand, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out that his promise was likely one that he didn't keep. Seriously, trusting Sawyer would be the last thing that I would do even during the Hour of Joy. But going back to that name, Captain AJ Griffin was the name of a character in an episode of the musical series Pulp Musicals. In The Ghosts of Antikythera, Captain AJ is a US Navy veteran during the American Civil War. Now this already mirrors Poppy Playtime, as what happened after the Hour of Joy is essentially a civil war between the prototype and his followers and everyone else. This chapter even continues that war theme. We've known for a long time that poppies are a symbol of remembrance of the First World War, and the area we have to cross to escape Yarnaby is named No Man's Land, another World War reference and the name of the land between trenches that no man could claim. But during the Ghosts of Antikythera, Captain AJ was losing a battle. His ship was hit by cannon fire and was sinking. This is where AJ was approached by a mysterious man named Cal. Cal offers to save the lives of AJ and his crew, in exchange for him owing him a favor later on. AJ's story ends when Cal returns to collect that favor. Goading AJ into drinking a concoction of gunpowder and rum, AJ begins to convulse as Cal explains that what he just drank would allow him to take over his body. AJ then dies as Cal does indeed take control of him. Now not only does this mirror Harley Sawyer offering the Warden a choice that he will later regret, but it also ties into one of my old theories that someone is going to use our body as a vessel too. Poppy said at the end of Chapter 3 that we are perfect, too perfect to lose. Back then I speculated that she was talking about our body. As far as I know, we are the only living human in Playtime Co. at this point. And with what we hear about the prototype trying to make a breakthrough, I think there's a good chance that one of them will want to take over our body, just like Cal did to AJ. If you want my best guess now, I think the prototype will try and transfer Poppy into us, thus completing the research and achieving complete control over the Circle of Life. Number 8. Steam Jump Scare. Now this is only a minor detail, but it's become such a recurring joke now that I just had to add it to the list. Every single chapter of Poppy Playtime includes at least one jump scare that comes from a sudden rush of steam from a pipe. Chapter 2 even had 2 of them. But it seems like someone at Mob must watch my videos, as I told them that they only get one. Since then, Chapter 3 and 4 have only had one each. Now while this might just be a little running joke like the lemon, an excuse for the devs to make us jump so they can laugh at us, it's also a really nice detail that the first ever jump scare in the series lives on in future chapters. But it's also probably a nod to the idea that this factory is slowly falling apart, which isn't surprising since it's built on such shaky foundations. I even made a theory once that this was the prototype messing with us in the game, and with what we know now, it could even be Harley Sawyer doing it, since we know he really does like to mess with us. Well, did. If Chapter 5 doesn't contain a Steam jump scare, we'll know it was just the Doctor being a dick all along. Number 9. Eddie murdered someone. During this chapter, we get our first proper listen to Eddie M.N. Ritterman. He was revealed as one of the department heads back in Chapter 2, but since then we haven't really seen nor heard all that much of him. In Chapter 4, we get a tape that shows us a conversation between him and a man that represents Warrenback Construction. It's actually a little confusing since the subtitles name him Warrenback, but Eddie refers to him as Mr. Silver. Now the man shows concern about building the Shelf, the name for the prison, questioning why he was building a prison underneath a toy factory. Eddie reminds him that he signed a contract with Playtime Co. that stated he had to do whatever was asked of him. He then signed another contract in 1990 that added the clause that payment would only be offered once jobs were completed to Playtime Co.'s satisfaction. Now your alarm bell should have been ringing as soon as you heard Eddie's accent. He's English, and we all know anyone with a British accent in American stories is a villain. In before I'm the secret villain of Poppy Playtime all along. But Eddie shows that villainous side towards the end of the tape. As he threatens the man, he gets close to him as they are both on the edge of the excavation, reminding him that this will get done one way or another. Now if that wasn't dark enough, the game massively implies that Eddie did eventually kill a man anyway. Later on, Eddie talks about getting rid of people before. He talks about it very casually as if this is something that has happened plenty of times before, and of course we know that it had. But right near the end of the game, as the prototype is taunting us with his mix of mimicked voices, we can hear Eddie's voice saying,
Try to land on your feet.
This was likely his last words to Warrenback as he pushed him over the edge. This makes total sense. Once the construction was completed, Eddie probably killed the man to make sure that the secret of the labs never got out. Those final words before Eddie pushed him are very dark, but it also makes me wonder how the prototype heard them. Was he there when it happened? Or, like he hinted in Chapter 3, is he really always watching? Number 10. The Cycles of Playtime Co. Now this last one is more of a theme than a hidden detail, but there are still some parts here that you might not have pieced together. Chapter 4 has a continual theme of cycles or the past repeating itself. We learn that some of the staff hate the toys because the toys hurt their friends, so they hurt the toys, who then in turn hurt them back. A cycle of violence. This was shown to us in notes and tapes left behind by resource extraction specialists. These are the people in Project Playtime who were sent in to extract toys. Now Chapter 4 gave us an explanation of what the theatre incident was. Some of the toys got loose in the theatre while it was open to the public and went on a rampage. Over 60 visitors died, alongside a dozen of the specialists sent in to contain them. But once the prison was complete, those resource extraction specialists weren't needed anymore and were posted to different parts of the factory. Most of them likely ended up as prison guards, who they themselves ended up as prisoners later. But another big cycle is Rich's rise to management. Now my last theory about Dowie being rich was obviously proven incorrect. It was still a fun theory, so I'm not too mad about it. We now know that Dowie was 3 children put into one experiment. That's actually something that I theorized could happen a long while ago with Poppy. But we have seen Rich's career develop all the way back since Chapter 1. He worked in the warehouse, was demoted to the island of misfit toys, before being moved somewhere else while he talked to his manager Stu in Chapter 3. But that conversation ties into Rich's tape in Chapter 4. In Chapter 3, Stu tells Rich that he's considering offering him his position after he retires. He knows Rich is an angry man, but he sees good in him.
Glad to see not everyone in this place has it out for me.
Not everybody, Rich. Not everybody.
In Chapter 4, we learn that Rich did indeed get that promotion and became manager of shipping. One of his staff, who also has a temper, was reported for yelling at one of his co-workers who was teasing about him disappearing. Something that again was happening throughout the factory. Just like Rich, who was given a chance after he gave up on the company, Rich gives this kid a chance, ending his tape with those same words given to him by Stu.
It's good to know not everyone here is terrible to us.
Not everyone, kid. Not everyone.
But this isn't the only person who parrots words they've heard before. No, obviously the prototype does, but Leif Pierre does it too. During the tape where Leif is explaining to the Doctor what happened to him, he tells him, "Fight or give in, it makes no difference." Almost word for word the same thing that Harley Sawyer said to the prototype.
So speak, or don't. Fight, or give in. Regardless, I learn something new about you every day.
Now, of course, the cycle here is that Harley was very cocky when he had the prototype under his control. Now he found himself under that same control of the other department heads. But I wonder if Leif Pierre was using these words on purpose, almost mocking Sawyer in this moment. All of these cycles tie into the idea of what goes around comes around, which could be a hint to our fate within the series. That doesn't bode well since, we keep killing everybody. But it also very cleverly ties into the theme of second chances and rebirth. The orphanage program began as a way to give orphans a second chance. The experiment started as a way to give sick and dying children a second chance. Rich was given a second chance within the company, we came back as a second chance to put things right, and of course, Huggy is being given a second chance to shine in Chapter 5. Or a second chance to kill us, whichever. I think these themes are so strong that they are going to tie into the end of the game. The second chance could be Poppy's second chance at life, something that the prototype is still desperately trying to figure out. We'll just have to wait and see if our body is what she needs for that or not. So there you have it, those are just some of the hidden details and themes in this chapter. What do you think? Was there anything I missed? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.